Hey guys, this is miicrow. I wanted to kind of update all of you on how I think the PTR changes to PvP are going to affect the meta. There has been one patch that has talked about patch changes. The few others have been bug fixes slash PvE related. The patch with the patch changes was the original patch that was released to the PTR and contained a variety of number of combat changes. The main ones that I think are impactful are the one change to blocking, where you can block ranged attacks. This inherently, I think, makes it a lot harder to kill healers, because healers have the ability versus fighting a ranged dex class to just drop a sacred on himself and block. So I think this in turn will increase the popularity of builds like Greatsword, which have already kind of taken over the PvP meta on the live patch as a whole again. Even though Greatsword has gotten nerfed numerous times, it still remains to be one of the only weapons that you can consistently build as a melee to be able to nearly or actually two-tap a healer and other kind of light slash medium oriented builds. It is the best weapon by far at containing space on the outside in terms of pushing into enemy teams' backlines, kind of protecting your own, but it's not as good at that. It's mostly good for attacking other teams' backlines and exploiting players for just a lack of survivability versus the greatsword itself. It's the only weapon that's able to kind of counter Ice Gauntlet, and as a whole, with these blocking changes, I expect Greatsword to become even more popular than it already was. This, in turn, will make it so that other builds that are usually meant that could counter Greatsword, I think, are going to be less good at it, because Greatswords can block those attacks. I generally don't think it's the best idea for a light class to be blocking unless you're a healer, but if you're a medium class, and you're a great sword and you're playing for space control, if you have a sacred that's dropped on you and you're getting shot by range, it is a lot better now probably to just block rather than dodge. That also kind of raises an interesting point of maybe we start seeing builds that aren't necessarily running 150 dex, but are instead going for some other bonuses that may be more impactful, like a great sword with 300 strength that is playing to go for a heavy attack into some sort of follow up from an ability, which in turn will get that bonus damage from that 300 strength. I don't think that is going to be super likely to be seen a ton, but I think that that kind of concept where you're looking to not necessarily play for dodging as much, but playing more for blocking is going to be used primarily to counter ranged builds. The other interesting thing is there is ult charge that you gain upon blocking, and there's ult charge that you gain upon taking damage. And I believe that when you get shot by something, you end up getting both of those bonuses. So it also might be an interesting way to kind of gain a little bit higher than usual ult charge. In terms of main weapon changes, bow did get some nerfs, but I still think bow is going to be incredibly strong even with the blocking nerf and every other nerf that is kind of coming to the bow. The thing that bow has that no other ability or no other weapon really does is consistent single target damage with heavy attacks that is a ranged weapon. Blunderbuss has to be close to people. Fire Staff, those players tend to miss most of their heavy attacks because they're just a little bit harder to actual land and their light attacks, but bow just seems to be in a really consistent spot where it could do a lot of quick burst damage that is built off of their basic attacks, and that concept being alone makes it so that bow it will just inherently just be very strong to PvP as a whole. That being said, Fire Staff is going to be in a pretty good spot next patch because you could still do consistent damage to people, even if people are blocking. If you hit around them or the sides of them, the block won't actually trigger off the abilities, and the Fire Staff abilities are cast so quickly that it is going to be really hard to block those abilities. So that being said, bow Fire Staff I still think are going to be in a good spot despite the nerf overall that is coming from blocking. That being said, if you are playing an OPR based environment, blocking may be actually pretty useful for you if you are playing inside of Sacreds and you just want to hold that space but not necessarily move up. The other major change that is kind of coming to the PTR, I would say, are the SNS related changes. The other changes that are present are impactful, but are a lot less game breaking than some of the other ones. The Great Axe Reap change is also nice. The Great Axe World change is also nice, but I think the thing that kind of stands out the most to me is the SNS change, where the aura is just basically almost doubled in its effective area. It's like 1.7% times its effective area, which is a very big deal. This in turn is going to make it so that you can't really avoid trying to knock down the SNS before you go for a point wipe. You kind of need to kill that SNS, otherwise it's going to be very, very difficult in order to wipe the other team because the SNS aura is just going to be consistently hitting a lot of people. This has already kind of been a meta on the live patch where people have more so gone to try to kill the other team's SNS and then stacked on their SNS in order to gain point tick and win points faster. I'd say generally is a much easier way to win point if you just ball up on top of your SNS and then try to fight other people once the enemy team's SNS is dead. So I would suspect that playstyle is going to increase, and there might even be a possibility of people trying to run more than one SNS with this aura change. I think overall, this change is going to make it so that point play is somewhat one-dimensional next patch. Because if you can't do the interesting thing with the current patch where you try to avoid the other team's SNS and you play it on the opposite side of the point because they're basically going to be able to shield literally half the point if they stand on like the bottom middle of point or the top middle of that area that will shield from past the flag all the way to the top of point. So it's a very, very big radius, and overall is going to make it so that SNS is just a must have in every single aspect. The Spear Cyclone change, I think, rises some interesting builds where some people are testing, like Farmer John on the current patch, where you go for a kind of Spear Cyclone knockdown oriented build with either Greatsword or SNS, but I believe he prefers Greatsword. And I suspect that that kind of build is going to be very, very strong next patch, where you try to put a slow on people, they can't necessarily get away because they are slowed. And that, on top of the new ult that is coming out, I think will just inherently make it so that disruptors are super, super, super strong next patch. I suspect detonate usage will go down and people will start using the new Sandworm ult that does increase damage. I believe it is the Cunning one, and that overall will just kind of put this additional pressure on top of healers that wasn't there before, because if that ult hits them, they're going to be slow, they're going to be sucked into a little mini grav well, if you will, and they're not going to have as many cooldowns in order to get out. So people are going to have to respond to that by using stone form to get out, and it's going to be very easy to force that stone form now, which in turn will make it very difficult for healers to consistently live. I think additionally that new Sandworm ult is going to be super, super impactful. The importance of Grav cannot be understated. The importance of Warhammer combos cannot be understated, and this ult is a kind of a combination of both. The Cunning one seems to be the best one from my testing. It pulls people in, has a slight stagger to it, and slows people when they try to get out, as well as does pretty significant damage. It's not as good as Detonate, but it is up there in terms of being to do consistently good damage. And it's also a damage type that is not heavily warded against. People tend to run Elemental Version right now, which kind of counters Detonate to a degree, because it works versus Detonate, but not a lot of people run the actual strike resistance that is present on Warhammer and not many other abilities in the game. So it is just very easily able to take advantage of that and do massive amounts of damage. The only thing that's kind of holding it back in terms of an ult is the cast time is a little bit longer, but I think the power from the ult itself is so strong that I don't think it matters. I suspect Armor Breaker will be run a little bit more next patch. It got a pretty significant buff, and overall, the gameplay next patch will be generally more melee favored than it was before. Mostly again from the blocking changes, but I also think classes that are able to play on top of an SNS that has this giant aura increase are just inherently going to get more value, and those classes that would naturally play in that range are those melee classes. So I think melee is on the rise, range kind of has fallen off a bit, and we will see how that affects the war and OPR metas. Let me know what you guys think, and I'll see you guys in the next video.